Joining us in the studio now is Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you back, Dr. Go.
Thanks for having me.
So the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting is underway, and on the weekend the ASEAN Regional Forum will also be taking place, where the top diplomats from South Korea, North Korea, the US and China will all be under one roof. Now that's quite an opportunity for all these nations to discuss and have talks. What are your hopes for the meeting that can come out from there?
Well, I'm a little bit cautious about the potential outcome of this meeting. The reason is because there are two different agendas right now being proposed implicitly by two sides. We are talking about the United States on one side and South Korea, North Korea, and China on the other one. We are talking about a different order of priority here. The United States putting up front the issue of denuclearization, and that's the first step that, from the United States point of view, the North Korea should make in order to have progress in the talks between the two countries. Whereas for the rest of the players in the region, one important priority right now, which is on the agenda this time, is the potential declaration of the end of the world. Making that declaration. That's an important political step towards basically replacing the armistice system that the South Korea and North Korea were under since the end of the Korean War, and replace that potentially with a peace regime. So that's a very important step that both Koreas are trying to have within this year. And that's one important objective that North Korea stated that it wants to have this year as well. So I think we're talking about two different objectives here. And then I think the two sides will probably agree to disagree this time.
So, as you said, it probably perhaps puts the US in an awkward position. The US top diplomat we're going is the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, of course, and he'll be trying to emphasize denuclearization while North Korea and South Korea and China will be pushing for the ending the armistice. But do you think there's any way that they can make progress? Do you think actually those three or four countries can meet to discuss?
Oh, definitely. They can. Definitely, this is an occasion for sitting down together and discuss about what they agree on and what they disagree on. And the thing is that there's still some gap about what should be the priority when it comes to talking between the United States and North Korea in this case. The United States still wants for North Korea to fulfill what North Korea had promised back in Singapore, which is taking concrete steps towards denuclearization. North Korea has shown signals, tentative signals, towards that direction, such as beginning to dismantling the missile test site in the western part of the country, and also as returning the remains of the U.S. soldiers who were killed during the Korean War almost 70 years ago. So these are all tentative steps, but for true denuclearization to take place, North Korea will have to do way more than what they have shown so far. So this is what the U.S. position is right now. I think Secretary Mike Pompeo has stated several times. But on the other hand, for North Korea, what they want to hear from the Americans is the bringing the end of the armistice agreement system regime in the Korean Peninsula and replace something more like the peace regime, which from their point of view, it's the offering of security guarantees the regime is seeking. So we're talking about two different priorities, and I don't think that neither side is ready to budge on this, unless there are more talks down the road from now.
There were some previous instances where the US and North Korean diplomats were in the same event, but they decided not to hold talks at all. What kind of message would it send if they didn't have talks, if one side said, no, not yet?
No, I'll be surprised if that happened. That would show that that kind of action will signal a serious deterioration in the level of talk that's going on between the two countries. We know that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo, even the North Koreans, are making sure that even though they have strong disagreements, serious disagreements, they try to put the best light possible on what's going on. They are refraining from criticizing each other. So if during the ASEAN Regional Forum, if both sides show this kind of negative mood, I think it's going to go down really negatively in the Korean Peninsula as well as in the international community. So I think they'll try to be in their best behavior on this occasion.
One of the other events that are happening today is the military talks that are happening between South Korea and North Korea. Can you briefly tell us, what are the main agendas that they'll perhaps most likely be talking about today?
This is actually a follow-up from the agreement that both Koreas reached in the Inter-Korean summit that took place back in April. In that summit, one of the agreements was for both Koreas to work together to lower the level of tension in the Korean Peninsula. Specifically, we are talking about the demilitarized zone that separates the two Koreas. And in this case, the military talks going on is about the potential concrete measures towards that goal of lowering the tension. So they're going to discuss about potentially repacifying, really demilitarizing the DMZ. So this sounds like a tautology, but the reason is that both sides have been, in a way, violating the terms of the armistice agreement by bringing in weapons and then heavily armed soldiers into the DMZ. So both sides are going to talk about taking steps to withdraw those forces from the DMZ and make DMZ a truly demilitarized zone. So another important issue that they're going to discuss is the implementation of the new the zone of peace in the Yellow Sea. Yellow Sea happened to be area of serious military clashes between the two Koreas in the past. So they tried to somehow lower the tension by coming up with joint fishing areas and other measures of confidence-building measures.
There's also talk that the two Koreas will perhaps discuss, as you mentioned in the ARF, that they might, between the two Koreas as well, discuss ending the Korean War and moving towards declaring the end of the armistice. Do you think that could happen here, this talks as well?
Well, that could happen. I mean, the North Koreans definitely could bring that up during the talks, even though this is beyond the scope of this kind of talks, because the talk is about lowering the tension on the military domain, not talking about changing the grand design in the Korean Peninsula. But then I think the North Korean side is, in a PR campaign, to bring up the issue of peace agreement to, in a way, indirectly influence the international public opinion, which in turn will pressure the United States government to put the peace agreement on the agenda. So I think it's possible for North Koreans to bring that up during these talks.
What's interesting about these military talks this time is the fact that it was North Korea who initiated the talks. They said they're the ones who invited South Korea to come and meet.
Exactly.
Why do you think they initiated this?
So this is a part of the North Korea's broad political campaign, so to speak, to change the public opinion that's right now dominant, right? In the international community. If you've been checking the media stories in the past couple of months, the focus has been the North Korean side not delivering what they had promised during the Singapore summit, such as taking concrete steps toward denuclearization by dismantling the test sites and so forth, or more importantly, coming out with the list declaring what kind of nuclear capability they possess. So what the North Koreans are doing right now is somehow trying to influence the international public opinion by saying that what's really important to be discussed right now is not so much about North Korea's denuclearization steps, but actually all kind of guarantees the U.S. government can provide the North Koreans to make North Koreans feel comfortable and then start engaging in the steps towards denuclearization.
There's a couple of other points, a couple of other things I wanted to mention today. The first is, it's been revealed that a senior Chinese official, Yang Jiechi, secretly visited South Korea earlier this month, and he met with South Korea's national security advisor, Chung Eui-yong. We don't have the details of what they discussed, but it's thought that they, again, discussed more about the possibility of declaring the end of the Korean War. What do you make of this latest development?
Well, so we know that the Chinese has not hidden their interest in having their influence being preserved in the Korean Peninsula. One important mechanism of doing so is by having their voice in the upcoming peace agreement that could be signed between the two Koreas and the United States. China wants to be on board because it wants to remain influential in the Korean Peninsula, and that's very important for them. And then I think the Chinese have been feeling that they are being like bypassed, so to speak, when in this ongoing discussion about the future of the Korean Peninsula. So I think this is an important objective that brought the senior diplomat Yang Jiechi to Seoul.
But why do you think it was done secretly?
Well, it's not a secret because we know about it, right?
We know about it now, but initially the actual meeting. He came. We didn't know about it until.
Well, you know, like for the Chinese, I think I mean it's important not to be so vociferous about what they want to do in the Korean Peninsula. I mean, it's actually the Chinese actually prefer kind of under the table negotiations because it's actually the nature of their system. I mean, unless they really have a strong need to disclose what's going on, they would like to have this kind of discussion behind closed doors so that they can actually limit the ramification of this kind of information being revealed in the public. So I think this actually shows that the Chinese want to do conduct this not in secret but in private, so that it kind of mitigates this impression that the Chinese are actually losing influence in the Korean Peninsula.
Do the Chinese really need to be involved, though, for this end-of-war declaration as such? Because I mean, even if without China they declare the end of war, they still benefit at the end of the day, don't they?
Well, that's definitely true. I mean, we can. I mean, if if really want to boil down to this, to the essential part of the peace agreement, we just need two Koreas to sign the peace agreement. We don't even need the United States. But I think it's actually the North Koreans who want to have the Chinese on board, not just the Chinese, because I think there's a symmetry in having two major powers actually backing their respective allies in the peace agreement, because in that sense, the both Koreas will have two sponsors to make sure that the agreement and the peace agreement is going to be abided by the two Koreas. So I think this is an issue of balance that the two Koreas are seeking.
And finally, there were also reports that came out today that said 5 planes took off from Pyongyang and went to Vladivostok in Russia. And we don't really know why. There were 3 passenger planes, we believe, and 2 cargo planes. And normally there are only 2 flights per week, which go from Pyongyang to Vladivostok. What do you think this could be?
Well, there are 2 different scenarios here. One could be that Kim Jong-un might be preparing for a trip, surprise trip to Vladivostok to sit down and meet with President Putin. But then I would say that the chance of that happening is actually not that high, because actually the Russians are preparing for a potential visit by Kim Jong-un in September for the occasion of the Eastern Economic Forum, which is very important for the Russians. And then there's already been invitation to Prime Minister Abe of Japan and the South Korean President Moon Jae-in already. So in that sense, I think the Russians would like to meet in September rather than now. But there's also a possibility that they are going to meet before that, but who knows. Another potential scenario is that it's more prosaic, in the sense that the North Korean workers actually are returning home from Russia, apparently. So maybe a North Korean government sent a special charter flight to Vladivostok to pick these workers up and bring them home as soon as possible. So we have 2 different scenarios, but we probably know about what really happened in the coming days.
Well, quite mysterious. But anyway, thank you for sharing your insights with us and shedding a bit more light on that as well.
Oh, my pleasure.